perpetual fight to gain and maintain some form of relevance, a group of warriors known as YouTubers waging all-out war in the ultimate battle. Their weapons, humor, cringe, depression, anxiety, and in some cases,
actual violence?
I'll beat you up, bro. Stop playing with me. What? I'll scrap you right now. What?
one by one, these brave warriors watch the worst, most deplorable, most disgusting content for the sake of your entertainment, in the pursuit of finding an equal footing among these noble warriors.
I watched the new show Velma, so yeah. So I know I'm a little bit late to filming this one because I think Velma, the show is actually done. Please try to ignore the back there. We kind of switched the rooms around a little bit, so my setup has changed. I'll maybe find something to put in the background, but I likely won't do that, so just pretend it's not there. A lot of people would like to convince you that Velma is one of the worst shows in existence. It's woke, it treats men like the butt of the joke, it fetishizes lesbian relationships, despite pointing out how that's such a boring trope on American television. It gives really bad ideas on how to deal with panic attacks. And lastly, it not only seems to pointedly alienate the audience that would watch the show, but also generally just disrespects the source material in both implicit and explicit ways for some unspecified reason. I'm here to tell you all that despite many of these criticisms being true, I don't agree that Velma is quite as bad as some people would want you to believe. I think that this is because many people based many of these critical observations on episodes 1 to 3. So to actually get an accurate idea of what the show is really about, I decided to watch the entire season, and I can tell you, Velma really isn't as bad as many people would like it to be. Now, does that mean that Velma is good by any stretch of the imagination? Absolutely not. In fact, there's nothing good enough about the show to make anyone interested in solving this mystery. Why did I write this cheesy cuck? I should probably edit that out. Make no mistake, the show is definitely a heaping pile of shit. What I'm saying is that the pile is just not as huge or as pungent as everyone wants you to believe. So before I get carried away, let's provide some context. What exactly is Velma? Many of you who have never heard of the show, you are so lucky, will look at all this footage and say, isn't that Scooby-Doo? Well, let me assure you, it is definitely not Scooby-Doo. Rather, Velma is a 2023 reimagining of Scooby-Doo that tells the origin of the Mystery Incorporated from the perspective of an idiot's notion of Velma Dinkley. I'm not gonna go into too much detail, but do be aware that there is likely gonna be visual spoilers throughout the video. If you wanna watch the show, I think it should, just not the utter garbage that most people seem to think it is. I definitely don't think it's worth watching, but I know that most people wanna go out and look for train wrecks on their own, so this is your final spoiler warning, I guess. So to break down what's actually wrong with the show, we're gonna be a little bit more methodical about it this time, looking specifically at 3 aspects. The first of these is the show's biggest flaw, and it's definitely the deciding factor of whether you'll stick around after the very first episode. It would be remiss of me to call this Velma an idiot's interpretation without explaining what that statement actually means, so allow me to do so. The Velma in Velma is a fucking idiot's interpretation of Velma! Okay, I'm sorry, I'll articulate it better. If you've seen other criticisms of the show, you'll have heard time and time again that this Velma is snarky, extraordinarily mean-spirited, but also just plain unlikable, to a degree where it's almost as if the writers started out writing a character that was meant to improve over time, but they just wrote her so badly that they couldn't reel in any kind of favor towards her, no matter what they tried at the end of the day. Velma is a complete bitch. To everyone that she can be a complete bitch to. And I get it. Velma in most of the other Scooby-Doo shows is sometimes snarky, sarcastic, maybe even a little narcissistic. But she was also really nice, if not the nicest character. I think it's important to note here that the writers were clearly aware that they were offering us a bowl of cereal with a big turd floating in the middle, and it's clear they tried to clean up that turd as much as they could as the show went on, but you know what they say about trying to shine a turd. It's still a big log of shit. What I mean is that there's a clear attempt to make Velma pay repercussions for her poor character. She's extraordinarily selfish, often using other characters for her own gain while actively ignoring their complaints or even their well-being. She's actively a piece of shit to people because she believes she knows better than everyone. This leads to multiple points where she's called out not only for being a cuck friend, but also for how unlikable she is for having this extraordinarily cynical and mean-spirited know-it-all attitude. At these points, she clearly feels remorse and sometimes has to suffer severe consequences for the way that she acts. Her moments of learning and development immediately fall apart once she gets what she wants, and so she never really becomes a better person, even at the end. She simply continues to act in this shitty way. But her being a complete douche is not even the biggest issue with her. I think that many people wouldn't necessarily argue that out of all the Mystery Inc. members, Velma was definitely the nerdiest of the group, and the 1970s to 2000s being what they were, being a nerd came with certain social bullshit where one would generally stand out as different from the normies. Obviously, the show Scooby-Doo showed us with the right friends you could do great things, and that's why there's hardly ever a moment in the Scooby-Doo show where anyone tries to alienate or treat Velma differently for being perceived as a nerd. This show, on the other hand, really seems to think that Velma is the most unique, out-of-this-world girl who most people would just find unattractive and unappealing because she's so different. She is the embodiment of the "she's ugly because she wears glasses" parody from Not Another Teen Movie.
Oh! No, anyone but her, not
Velma Dinkley.
Guys, she's got glasses and a ponytail. Look at that. She's got paint on her overalls. What is that? Guys, there's no way she could be prom queen.
Not only do they go out of their way to make her seem so unique, but everyone in the show seems to do their best to remind us that Velma is the nerdy one who would be socially ostracized just for looking and acting as she does, despite this show being set in 2023, a time when chaotic energy is something people seem to appreciate. What makes this an idiot's interpretation of Velma is not only that it perverts all the subtle parts of Velma that made her quirky yet sassy nature stand out from the others, who all each had their own unique trait that made them stand out at the same time, but it also seems to misunderstand what Velma's place was in the Mystery Incorporated gang. I don't know about any of you, but to me, Velma was always the actual attractive one in the group. She's smart, she's got spunk, she's literally the brain of the operation and often serves as the voice of the audience, calling out things that most people were probably thinking about as they were watching the series. Despite all her snark, sarcasm, or her seemingly nerdy nature, Velma remained likable because you could always see her doing things for the right reasons. She acted kind when it was called for, and never once did her nerdy nature make her unappealing in the slightest. I get the idea that the writers made her so unappealing in the show and kept emphasizing how unattractive she was, not only for the sake of humor, but also to make her slightly more relatable to the viewers. After all, that is what made Velma such a good character. She was one of the most relatable characters in most of the shows. However, this hyperbolic focus on her nerdiness and the subsequent unattractiveness that stems from it, as well as this nature of hers that makes her stand out because she's so different, ultimately makes her relatable to no one, and we end the show never really finding anything but a really shitty character. A caricature of what someone thinks Velma was in the original shows. A lot of other creators have said that this really terrible version of Velma is a result of Mindy Kaling using Velma as a self-insert of who she wanted to be when she was in high school. And there's actually a really interesting video about the issues with Mindy Kaling's comedy by creator Saji Sharma, who I'd much rather you go listen to than me, because if I'm being honest, I don't think I've laughed at a single thing Mindy Kaling has done or said. That's not because of her. I haven't really seen a lot of her stuff. My sense of humor is also weird, and I'm notoriously full of shit. So maybe go watch someone who's got their fingers closer to the pulse on this issue. I'll just add that something that Saji touches on kind of makes me think that those who criticize this Velma as a self-insert may be right, given this weird infatuation Velma has with Fred for the majority of the show. You'll obviously have to go see Saji's video to understand this point. Anyway, enough of this bit. Many of you are obviously wondering about the boy, asking me, Moby, where is Shaggy? Well, Shaggy's not fucking here. Instead, we get Norval. And before you go asking, because I myself was wondering the entire time that I watched the show, yes, Norval is actually Shaggy's real name. And I think we probably would have gotten this from the show if they bothered to give even an ounce of fucking respect to the original characters. Norval is not Shaggy. He's not a replacement for Shaggy. He doesn't bear a mild resemblance to Shaggy's character. He is as far from Shaggy as this show is from actually making anyone laugh. Norval is the new nerd of the gang. He hates drugs.
I think it has something to do with drugs, which I hate.
He openly admits that he simps for Velma, despite her being a terrible fucking person. The issue is not that there's anything necessarily overtly wrong with Norval, it really just depends on your point of view. I mean, I was that age too. I simped for people who I later realized were really just assholes. So his relationship with Velma really ever makes me upset with him. It really just highlights how terrible her character is. The biggest issue with Norval is that he is just so fucking boring. Shaggy wasn't particularly smart, nor was he particularly masculine. I could see Shaggy having many of the traits that Norval has in the show as a younger Shaggy, but at least Shaggy had personality. Shaggy was funny, he was brave despite how scared he always was, but most of all, his entire character wasn't built around the idea of chasing after fucking Velma. The man had priorities: hunt ghosts, catch criminals, eat some snacks with the dog. I wrote dog DAWG because I wanted to emphasize just how important a friend Scooby was to Shaggy. I should probably edit that out. Later, we'll return to this issue of just how supplemental Norval is as a character, and why that probably leads to him being so incredibly boring at the end of the day. Next, we have Daphne and Fred. I'm mixing them because I'm getting tired of talking about these characters. These two are about the closest to the originals when it comes to looks, but as anyone would expect, they still remain quite far removed from the characters who they're meant to present. Fred is a spoiled rich boy who can't look after himself, and the show goes out of its way to show you that he has a small dick. Actually, the show goes out of its way to pretty much make fun of this dude for most of its runtime. A lot of creators pointed out that the small dick thing was like a running joke, but I think it was brought up for maybe 2 episodes, and those 2 episodes were kind of focused on him being a big fucking baby. At some point, I think I forgot it was even a thing, but that's neither here nor there. Just know the joke is not as drawn out as some critics might suggest. Fred does kind of have an arc, but he pretty much remains a rich prick for the whole show. And make no mistake, he was absolutely written for the sole purpose of being made fun of for the fact that he's a rich white guy. I don't really have strong feelings about Fred one way or another, but I always kind of imagine him to be a well-meaning jock that mostly serves as the muscle of the group in the original show, and I think him being kind of airheaded would make a lot more sense if he was the kind of guy that focused on sports and only really stepped in because he was forced to. But okay, Fred wore an ascot, so he must be a rich white baby, written for the sake of making a joke that no one's really laughing at. Daphne is genuinely the closest to her counterpart as can be, and that's really a stretch because despite her seemingly bumboish persona in the original shows, I never thought of Daphne as particularly dumb. The show can't decide whether she's dumb or a genius, so they just make her both and use either one when it's convenient. She's really infatuated with being popular, which is another thing which I suppose is in stark contrast to her counterpart, because I never really got the idea that being popular meant all that much to Daphne. In the show, she sells drugs, she's apparently addicted to getting into danger, and honestly, her characters are really not that interesting because nothing about her feels like a character. It feels like everything that is written about her, or everything that we learn about her, is for the sake of a joke. And that kind of leads us into the real issue with all of these characters. The issue being just how supplementary each of them are. All of them are almost exclusively there to help, simp, or try to kill Velma. Norval's entire story is founded on the fact that he's in love with Velma. Fred's whole arc, including some things we find out about his family, is mostly just there to either make an unfunny joke or to tell what is mostly Velma's story. The only other character that really gets their own story is Daphne, but that story doesn't even lead to an interesting conclusion. The supplementary nature of these characters also highlights just how poorly these characters are developed, including Daphne, who goes through what one might consider to be growth, but never really rises above her popular girl infatuated with popularity stereotype. If they're not there to be used or made fun of, these characters are genuinely just amalgamations of line art and color in motion that happen to be standing next to Velma. Of course, now I'm sure many of you are wondering, where's Scooby-Doo? Where's the dog?
What the dog doing?
Scooby's not here. I can't be bothered to look up why, but Warner Bros. Apparently told Mindy Kaling that they can't have the dog in the show, and thank fuck for that, honestly. There are so many jokes made at the expense of the original show. For our discussion, it's quite clear that they had no intention of paying any kind of respectful homage to the characters that they are reimagining, and I would honestly hate to see what they would do with Scooby-Doo if he actually was in the show. He's just a good boy, and if they fucking touched him, I think the backlash would have been so much worse than it already was. Okay, so yeah, I gotta give some props. I was pretty interested in the mystery, but this is because I knew I wanted to make this video, and it took a lot of willpower to ignore just how bad the characters were. Make no mistake though, the only part of the story I was interested in was solving the overall mystery, and towards the end, the answer kind of became obvious. The story centers on a series of murders that take place at the school the characters go to, where someone is taking the brains of popular hot girls. Tangentially related to this is the story of Velma's family. Velma's mother has been missing since she was young, and her disappearance has caused Velma to become traumatized of ever doing any kind of mystery solving. Essentially, anytime she attempts to solve a mystery, she begins to hallucinate, which triggers her panic attacks. Which is where the really badly dealt with panic attacks came from that people have been reacting to. Honestly, it makes sense that they don't take panic attacks or how to deal with them seriously. The writing makes it so that every single time these panic attacks take place, they always just seem like things that happen without much meaning. Maybe it's because we don't give a fuck about Velma, or maybe it's just something about the way they deal with it that makes it so that we never take it as something to actually fear for her sake. Unfortunately, the story is extremely centered on Velma, and this leads to two major problems. The first is, you will not care about anyone or their family. Every character in the show is a terrible or boring fucking person. And so if you particularly dislike Velma, why would you care about anything that involves her? They never really give us a good reason to care about her mother, and the father's nonchalance to his wife's disappearance eventually makes you start to wonder if she really did just run out on the family like he insists she did. The second major issue is that nothing in the story ever actually brings the Mystery Incorporated group together. This is supposed to be the origin story of how this group comes together, but at no point does it ever look like there is some kind of movement towards them forming a group of mystery solvers. What we have is a disparate group of characters literally only connected by the fact that they all go to the same school or that they all know Velma. None of them are really friends with each other, and at no point does the story really call on them to work together to become this fated gang. Instead, we're forced to deal with Velma talk and fucking talk in almost every scene of every episode, and I cannot tell you how obnoxious it is to hear her speak every time she opens her fucking mouth. This is not a reimagining of Scooby-Doo or the Mystery Incorporated gang. This is the story of a snarky asshole under the guise of a Scooby-Doo reimagining that has no intention of taking the story in the Scooby-Doo direction. How did Riverdale bring their fucking characters together better than this?
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo.
Your enjoyment of the story could go either way, and the mystery is interesting in the sense that you want to see who the killer is, but that's not based on any kind of strength of the story itself. At the very least, I can say the story, if you ignore every other annoying thing about the show, is the strongest element the show has to offer, and even then you might not enjoy it in the slightest regardless. There is none. These quote-unquote jokes land like socks on a wet floor.
I'm off a boat pack, smoking beanies tonight.
Okay, I guess I should say a little bit more. Most of the jokes in the show is this meta, self-referential humor, or some kind of social or political statement made in the form of a joke. You know a show is written poorly when every single character in it starts to deliver the same kind of humor. One critic pointed out, and I'm inclined to agree with him, that Velma seems to have a habit of poking fun at tired television tropes, but fails to provide any new ideas in their place. The setup is pretty much, it's really dumb when TV shows do this, proceeds to do the thing that they make jokes about. This hypocritical writing is prevalent from episode 1.
Then why was your favorite part of the Riverdale pilot when Betty and Veronica kissed?
Well, because I was instantly called out as tired in the scene.
A few moments later.
See, now if this was a show, it'd be super hot if you two kissed.
As for the jokes that are just vaguely disguised political or social statements, nearly every character in the show makes these kinds of jokes. Once again, another critic points out that it seems every character in the show is a joke machine, and again, I can't agree more. Every time one of these characters open their mouth to make one of these fucking idiotic statements, it kind of reminds me of Rick and Morty. Yes, I know it's a bad time to bring up this show. You know where Rick would kind of do the same thing, making some hyperbolic statement about some social or political thing that's meant to be humorous, but really just shows some writers' real-world thoughts on some real-world thing. The only difference is, there, at least we had Morty to call him out when he was making these dumb fucking statements. No one is calling out this cast. All of them are making the same fucking joke. Again, I know it's poor taste at the moment to use Rick and Morty as a comparison, but it's really just a clear way to illustrate what I mean. Humor is subjective, and I'm sure that there are those who will find this kind of humor funny. I myself maybe let air out of my nose once or twice. I can't remember at what points in the show or at what jokes, but for the sake of transparency, I will just say that not every moment of the show was just plain boring. So now you really gotta wonder, who is this show for? Who is this novel written for? Who is this version of Shaggy meant to appeal to? Who is this Velma supposed to appeal to, except for the writers and actors? This is clearly not for the fans, not with all the jokes they make at the expense of the original. It's also clearly not for fans of adult cartoons, since they actively make fun of those people as well.
You know what 420 is, right?
Yeah, it's code for adults who still watch cartoons.
It's also weird how, for an adult cartoon, this show comes across as extremely PG-13, but I don't know a single 13-year-old that would laugh at this cringy shit or catch most of the references that they're making. So it clearly doesn't work as a 14 show either. I'm not sure if going for a harder R rating would have made the show much better, but it at least would have given the show enough of a bite to come with its egregiously loud bark. Finally, I want to address the issue that many people have had with the fact that so many of the characters have had their races changed. I should preface this by making it clear that I'm a colored kid from Cape Town. Representation is not something that has ever really mattered to me, nor is it something that I necessarily craved. The closest and most realistic representation of Cape Town coloreds has been in Four Corners and Nome Scully, and both of those are shows about gangsters, essentially showing that the closest we can get to colored reality, at least Cape Town colored reality, is by focusing on its worst parts. Even Blood and Water, a show that takes place in Cape Town, feels completely foreign. So you can obviously imagine that in South Africa, the discussion about the representation is as tenuous as it is anywhere else that the conversation is being had. I myself have always just gravitated towards interesting characters and interesting stories, and I never felt like I needed someone to have my skin color or my dialect or anything like that to make that person relatable to me. That's not what makes my point of view feel represented. Being born colored does not entirely define my perspective or outlook, though I do get the argument surrounding the fact that people of different cultures, ethnicities, and romantic and sexual preferences, they do exist. Telling the story of straight white people gets pretty boring, I'm sure, especially since these stories, even for white people, have gotten pretty stale. So there does seem to be other stories or with other perspectives that can be told. There's a room for them. There's a fuckload of room for them. Sure, at the start, I myself questioned why these characters needed to have their races changed. But at the end of the day, being a particular ethnicity or culture never really mattered with these characters, so it didn't really matter to me. They can be whatever the creators wanted them to be, I guess. However, I don't think that representation should be used to make some kind of statement. Ethnicities and cultures are not weapons to be used in some kind of Hollywood debate that majority of the world is not a part of. Representation should be a means of showing the world that people of all different walks of life are no less normal than the people who have filled American screens for decades. In the show, I can see them trying really hard to use cultures and ethnicities as premises to sell their conclusion in this Hollywood debate. And I get why that might bother some people, though it's really not so egregious that it's brought up at every moment that they can bring it up. At some points, ethnicity, culture, all that really doesn't matter for the story, so it's really not that much of a bother. At least, it didn't bother me all that much. On the other hand, there are points that it's clear that these writers really don't know how to adequately address the reality of the perspectives that these people of different ethnicities might have. They instead just use the ethnicities of these characters to make jokes or grandstanding statements in their Hollywood debate. All of this is very ironic, especially since the show seems to keep teetering in the line between showing off how much representation they've taken into account in some places, and in other places making a show of just buying into really dumb or unnecessary stereotypes for the sake of making really bad jokes.
On TV shows, the malt shop owner is always a friendly black man or a spicy and meatball Italian. Drugs here! Get your drugs here! Narc! Narc! White girl with too much money? White girl with too much money.
You don't know me. I'm a white girl who's bored.
Velma, I could feel you forcing that.
Yeah? You know what else feels forced? Your belief that you're the only one sleeping with the lead.
Sometimes these jokes make some of the writers' perspectives on certain topics rather confusing.
Exactly. I spit truth without a filter, like every comedian before #MeToo.
Huh? But it's also possible that there's some underlying idea to these jokes that I may not understand. That might be giving the writers too much credit, so this last part is not really a major issue for the show. I really think that the characters and the writing is where the show falls apart. And I kind of made this video specifically to address the question of, is it really that bad? So, is it that bad? The answer honestly is no, it's really not that bad. The writing is self-indulgent to the point that it makes no characters relatable, nor does it make any of the story elements interesting enough to ignore how bad the characters are. But for the most part, the show is just really boring and unfunny and not very interesting. And that's really about it. It could have been so bad that it's good to just watch and criticize, but I didn't see it that way. Rather, for the most part, the show is just so dull and clearly created for an audience consisting of just the show's writer's room that it commits the greatest sin a story can commit. It's just plain boring. Anyway, thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. I don't know why I don't ever say this at the beginning of the video. I should probably say it somewhere in the middle, but you know, I feel like I'd rather just do my video and you can decide whether you want to like it or whether you want to subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed Velma, or if you watched Velma, or if you plan on watching Velma, please leave a comment. Let us know what your thoughts are on the show or what your worries are about the show. And if you kind of disagree with any of the points that I've made so far, please do say what your thoughts are. I would actually really like to know if there's anyone that disagrees with me, or if someone that might have a different perspective on a lot of the things that we spoke about. But yeah, other than that, I will see you all on the next one. Have a very good fuck off.
I'm off a boat pack, smoking beanies tonight. I'm off a big sack, smoking big dick tonight. I'm off a boat.